Good afternoon, I'm Marshall Zelinger. Welcome to Politics Unplugged. Last week, a big week for presidential campaigns here on the Front Range. Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton made her first stop in the Mile High City since accepting her party's nomination a few days earlier. That visit was Wednesday, the same day as Governor Mike Pence, the Republican nominee for vice president, was wrapping up his first campaign stop in Colorado just as Clinton's began. But first, we're pleased to have U.S. Senator Michael Bennet with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Senator, you're in the middle of a race that at one point the pundits deemed the most winnable for Republicans. Why should our voters send you back to Washington?
I think that I'd like to go back to Washington to help lead us out of the dysfunction that there is there. For 7 years, I've not contributed to that dysfunction. I've worked across the aisle to actually produce results for Colorado, from the Farm Bill to the Education Bill to the work I've done on immigration reform. And I think that's consistent with what people in our state want. Our state is a third Democratic, a third Independent, and a third Republican. They're sick and tired of sending people there that they can't seem to work with anybody, and that's why I'm asking for another term.
This might be an unusual election given the national landscape. Why should we not send somebody else for some change?
Well, I think it depends on what people want. If you want somebody who says that they think the problem with Republicans in Washington is that they've cooperated too much with the president, that they've been complicit with the president, if you think that Ted Cruz should be the next Supreme Court justice, then you should vote for my opponent, because those are his positions. I think in Colorado, we are going to have an extremely clear choice. I mean, there is not a wider range of policy views in this country than there is in this Senate election right now. And I think in the end, the views that I've espoused over the last 7 years and the work that I've done in a bipartisan way, I think is more consistent with what Colorado wants.
I've said on a previous episode of Politics Unplugged that polls are crap. The pollsters thought this was the most winnable Republican race.
You can't use that word on TV.
It's now these same pundits that thought you would could easily get beat by a Republican. They're leaning Democrat now.
Right.
What do you take from that sentiment that you could win, not necessarily because of what you do, but because what the Republicans didn't do?
Well, I think, Colorado is a swing state. It's a very purple state. So I don't look at the polls at the beginning or at the end. I just get up and go to work, and that's what we'll do until Election Day, and that's, as everybody says, the only poll that matters.
The Olympics have just started, and Rio has a Zika concern. Florida has a Zika concern. When you toured the Fort Collins CDC facility, I was told that Colorado does not have a Zika concern because the closest that one of those mosquitoes could live is Oklahoma and couldn't live in our climate. Why are you one of the senators that's trying to lead the charge with Congress coming back to work to deal with Zika funding?
Because, look, this is a matter of the health and safety for the United States of America. And again, this is just a basic thing that government's supposed to do. In this case, be able to help keep us safe from a mosquito-borne disease. And the funding, everybody agrees that the funding needs to be done, but it hasn't gotten done just because people want to continue to score political points. So my view is, look, I mean, there are a whole bunch of reasons why we shouldn't be on recess. That's one. How about the fact that we're not even considering a Supreme Court nominee when the court is locked down at an 8-8 or a 4-4 split, which has never happened in the history of the United States? At some point, and this is the thing that's driving people crazy, at some point, people are coloring so far outside the lines of what is conventional American political thought that they can't even keep the lights on back there or fund Zika. And we do have, I was there in Fort Collins, I don't know if it was with you, but we do have some of the most important studies being done in the country right here in Fort Collins. Those scientists up there may be able to help solve this problem for us, and we ought to fund it.
You've been known to have a low-key personality, and that was pretty fiery. Does it bother you that people assume you're like a boring senator?
Well, my kids certainly would say even worse things than that. I all the time, every weekend, I'll say to them, I got to go give a talk. Does anybody want to come hear my speech? And they each take turns saying, it depends. How boring is it going to be? So it's become
kids can say that.
My kids can say that. It's become a ritual. And I'm not obviously a flashy politician. That's not who I am. I'm just try to put one foot in front of the other to do something useful for the people that I represent. And I think that people recognize that.
You were instrumental 2 years ago in keeping pro- and anti-fracking issues off the Colorado ballot. To anti or limiting fracking issues are back now.
Right.
Where do you stand with
I
that?
haven't read them yet, so I haven't studied them, but I'd say in general, I'd rather decide these things in a conversation in our state than have them on the ballot in our Constitution. We've got a very important balance to strike in Colorado. You know, we care about our energy environment, clean energy, and our natural gas production. And we also cherish the place we live, and that's a continuing organic balance that we have to make. And I worry sometimes that a one-size-fits-all approach at the ballot doesn't give enough flexibility for people going forward. On the other hand, you know, it is a reasonable concern that people have that if they're living in a subdivision someplace and somebody drills a well, even if they have the property right to drill that well, that's not going to amuse the people that are in that house, and we've got to work through those kinds of conflicts.
At the state Democratic convention, you had Bernie Sanders supporters that were very vocal, trying to get you to change your vote.
Right.
And then at the DNC last month, you weren't there when Colorado had the roll call to cast the delegates.
Right.
Why were you not in Philadelphia? Where were you when those votes were?
I was in Colorado, and the reason I wasn't there is I didn't think I should be there for 4 days. I thought a day and a half was enough, and the rest of the time I wanted to be in the state. And by the way, when we had scheduled that, the vote was supposed to be scheduled for Wednesday night, I think, which is when I got there, so I would have been there to vote, but they ended up rescheduling it for Tuesday. It wasn't to avoid voting. That's the implication of your question.
Do you get to go after the fact? Because I know the RNC had an issue. Can you change the abstention? Should you have changed the abstention to not
I don't know. I do know this. It will make absolutely no difference in terms of who the presidential nominee of the Democratic Party is.
Okay. Senator Michael Bennet, thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing.
Appreciate it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Thanks.